Hi friends, welcome to my channel. In the last program, we talked about the Aryans. A link to that program there is in the description of this video. Now, I'll tell you about another very ancient people that inhabited the eastern Mediterranean more than 10,000 years ago. In academic circles, there is no consensus on the name of these people, and they are called Anatolian Neolithic farmers. But we'll call them Anatolians, firstly, because it's simply more convenient, and secondly, because most scientists consider that the ancestral homeland of these people is Eastern Anatolia and Armenian highlands, and the time of their formation as a separate ethnic group is the 13th millennium BC. Geneticists associate with them haplogroup G. Archaeologists, the early Neolithic cultures of Near East. And linguists, Euro-Eurasian languages. According to modern science, Anatolians were the first people on Earth who changed a lifestyle of hunting and gathering to one of agriculture. It happened around the 10th millennium BC, when the Anatolians settled the territory of the Fertile Crescent and founded the first settlements there. One of these settlements was Çatalhöyük, founded in the 8th millennium BC and located in the south of modern Turkey. According to archaeological data, this settlement existed between 7,500 and 5,500 BC. It had about 2,000 houses and up to 10,000 people. The inhabitants lived in mud brick houses that were cramped together in an aggregate structure. No footpaths or streets were used between them. Most were accessed by holes in the ceiling. The rooftops were effectively streets. The ceiling openings also served as the only source of ventilation. Houses had plaster interiors. The main rooms contained raised platforms that may have been used for a range of domestic activities. Typical houses contained 2 rooms for everyday activities, such as cooking and crafting. All interior walls and platforms were plastered to a smooth finish. Heads of animals, especially of cattle, were mounted on walls. The economy of the Anatolians based at that time on agriculture. They grew wheat, peas, beans, and lentils. Raised sheep and goats, but cattle, pigs, and deer were still wild, and their meat was hunted. The Anatolians also developed crafts. They mastered pottery production. Initially, pottery was used for storing food, and only around 6,500 BC it began to be used for cooking. In addition to pottery, archaeologists have found many obsidian and silicon objects, knives, arrowheads, and mirrors, fragments of fabrics and baskets. A lot of female figurines made of marble, limestone, alabaster, and clay. The most famous of them is a statuette of an obese woman sitting on 2 leopards. In addition to settlements, these people constructed in the 9th, 7th millennia BC monumental religious buildings. The most interesting of which is the megalithic complex in Göbekli Tepe. This is the earliest megalithic complex on Earth. Its construction began in the 10th millennium BC and continued for several millennia. This complex consists of several circular structures framed by T-shaped columns up to 6 meters high, with bas-reliefs depicting vultures, scorpions, and other animals. The weight of some blocks used in the construction of the complex reaches 50 tons, and their delivery from the quarry to the construction site required the effort of at least 1,000 people. Such construction couldn't be done by a primitive group of people. Consequently, the Anatolian society of that time was already well organized. The complex in Göbekli Tepe was used for 2 millennia, and then, in the 8th millennium BC, it was abandoned and deliberately covered with earth. This work, as well as its construction, required enormous efforts. At that time, there wasn't yet any significant social or property stratification in Anatolian society. All the houses in different settlements were almost the same in size and design. Thanks to famine, the population grew rapidly, and the Anatolians began to occupy neighboring territories. In the 7th, 5th millennia BC, they occupied the entire Middle East, Southern and Central Europe. They were the first people who began practicing agriculture in Mesopotamia and in the Nile Valley. In Mesopotamia, with the Anatolians is associated the Ubaid archaeological culture of the 5th millennium BC. This culture was the source of the origins of Sumerian civilization. At that time appeared the first temples and proto-cities, such as Ur, Uruk, Lagash, and others. The basis of Ubaid's economy was irrigation agriculture. The majority of the population lived at that time in villages, in small huts made of cane and clay. But among them were large public buildings, which were located in the center of the settlements. The largest building of this type is the temple in Eridu, which over several centuries has evolved from an insignificant chapel to the largest temple of Mesopotamia. We'll talk more about Ubaid in one of the following videos. Subscribe to the channel so as not to miss it. And in the meantime, let's look at the expansion of the Anatolians into Europe. This process had started through a single massive migration from Anatolia into the Balkans in the 7th millennium BC. Then the Anatolians had subsequently split into 2 wings, one which spread northwards along the Danube through the Line pottery culture, and another which spread westwards across the Mediterranean coast through the Cardial ware culture. By 5600 BC, these cultures had brought agriculture to Iberia and Central Europe. As a result, by the 5th millennium BC, in the south and center of Europe had formed a significant agricultural center. The people here lived in affluence, and they didn't have a strong social stratification. The main occupation of the inhabitants were agriculture and cattle breeding. They cultivated the land using a plough, grew barley, wheat, rye, oats, millet, peas and beans. The grain was ground into flour by stone mills. They were also cattle breeders. Besides cattle, they had goats, sheep and pigs, but almost didn't have horses. The territory was quite densely populated. Most of settlements were located near rivers, on gentle slopes suitable for agriculture. These were both small villages consisting of several houses and large proto-cities having a population of more than 20,000 people. The most typical buildings were timber frame and mud houses with thatched roofs and wooden floors. Some of the houses had 2 floors and up to 5 rooms. Sometimes in the settlements there were public buildings very similar to the megarons of Mycenaean Greece. In this European agricultural center, at a very high level of development, were crafts. These people made highly artistic pottery and high-quality tools of polished stone, bone and deer horn. In the 4th millennium BC, they mastered the metallurgy of copper and gold. They began to make the first metal products. From all of the above, we can see that in the middle of the 4th millennium BC, the Anatolians had created the greatest civilization and were the dominant ethnic group on vast territory, from the modern Spain in the west to the Iranian highlands in the east, and from the Middle Rhine in the north to the Middle Nile in the south. But at the end of this millennium, the situation has changed dramatically. The neighbors of the Anatolians were gaining strength, and they began to spread to new territories. Massive human migrations were beginning. The Aryans moved from the Eurasian steppe, and the Semites from the Sahara. As a result, the Anatolians were caught between the hammer and the anvil. The Aryans moved on them from the northeast, and the Semites from the southwest. These people were superior to Anatolians in military potential and organization. And under the onslaught of superior enemy, the Anatolians began to give up their positions. Somewhere they left their native places and went away, and somewhere were assimilated by Aryans. Eventually, in the middle of the 3rd millennium BC, the Aryans became the dominant ethnic group in Europe, and the Semites in the Middle East. Nevertheless, the cultural contribution of the Anatolians to new civilization was enormous, and we'll talk about it in one of the following videos. Subscribe to the channel so as not to miss it. At this point, I wish to conclude this video. If it was interesting, leave comments, put likes and repost. Thank you for your attention. See you later. Goodbye.